He mapped rivers no one had seen, painted animals no one had imagined, and recorded a world that vanished. Then he died alone. In the late 18th century, Colonel Robert Jacob Gordon spent nearly 20 years at the Cape, and in that time he recorded an incredible treasure trove of knowledge. Maps, drawings, journals, covering everything from the land's geography and wildlife to its plants, weather, geology, and the people who lived there. His work gives us one of the most complete pictures of southern Africa in the last decades of the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. Gordon wasn't just a soldier. He was a botanist, zoologist, ethnographer, linguist, geologist, cartographer, and artist, all rolled into one. And he did it with only a handful of untrained servants and semi-skilled soldiers at his side. Yet today, his name is almost forgotten, partly because, tragically, he took his own life, partly because his journal stayed hidden until 1964 and wasn't published until 1988. So who was this man who mapped and named the Orange River, catalogued South Africa's wildlife, and died alone, accused, broken, and forgotten? Welcome back to the channel. If you love digging up lost history like this, please subscribe, hit the like button and share this video. You can also support my work by buying me a coffee. The link's in the description. In the shadow of empire, one man quietly shaped the scientific understanding of an entire continent. Robert Jacob Gordon, a Dutch army officer, explorer, linguist and naturalist. Long before GPS or satellite images, he traversed thousands of miles of southern Africa. He mapped rivers and mountains, painted animals Europeans had never seen, and listened closely to the people who lived on the land. Gordon wasn't just exploring, he was observing, cataloguing and recording every detail with painstaking care. But despite everything he gave to history, his name is missing from most textbooks. Why? Because his story didn't end in triumph, it ended in tragedy. In 1795, during a time of political chaos, Gordon was accused of treason by his own soldiers for surrendering peacefully to the British at the Cape. Humiliated, isolated, and physically unwell, he took his own life. More than 2 centuries later, we're only starting to grasp the full scope of Gordon's legacy. In this video, we'll uncover his scientific brilliance, his artistic vision, his deep encounters with indigenous communities, and the heartbreak that ended it all. Robert Jacob Gordon was born in 1743 in the Dutch town of Doesburg in Gelderland. He was the son of Jacob Gordon, a Scottish officer in the Dutch Army's Scots Brigade. Robert grew up in a household shaped by both military discipline and Enlightenment curiosity. He followed in his father's footsteps, joining the army, but he carried passions far beyond the battlefield: linguistics, natural history, astronomy, and above all, exploration. Gordon received formal training in classical languages, mathematics, and the sciences. He spoke Dutch, English, and French fluently, and later learned Afrikaans and Khoikhoi. This ability to move between languages, cultures, and ideas would become one of his defining traits. In 1773, Gordon was posted to the Dutch Cape Colony. For most, the Cape was just a strategic stopover for ships travelling between Europe and Asia. For Gordon, it was a land brimming with untapped discovery. He immediately began documenting its terrain, wildlife, and people with meticulous care and unrelenting curiosity. It was during these early years at the Cape that Gordon met 2 men who would shape his scientific path: Carl Peter Thunberg and Francis Masson. Thunberg, a Swedish naturalist and direct student of Carl Linnaeus, arrived at the Cape in 1772 to collect plants for the VOC and the botanical gardens at Leiden. Soon after, Masson, a Scottish botanist sent by Sir Joseph Banks, arrived with similar goals. Both were experienced collectors, deeply committed to advancing natural science in Europe. Gordon, though largely self-taught, was captivated by their methods. In 1773-74, he eagerly joined them on an expedition to the mountains between Cape Town and False Bay, contributing his local knowledge, language skills and access to inland routes and indigenous communities, places foreign scientists couldn't reach alone. In return, he learned their techniques, how to classify, sketch and preserve specimens, building the foundation for his own remarkable scientific work. These collaborations show something crucial about Gordon. He wasn't just a passive observer. He actively engaged with the scientific ideas of his time, bridging European theory and African reality. In many ways, he was an interpreter, not only of languages, but of landscapes, peoples and cultures. While Thunberg and Masson eventually returned to Europe with their collections, Gordon stayed. He saw the Cape not merely as a posting, but as a calling. Over the next few years, he led further expeditions deep into the South African interior, farther than any European had ventured before. He mapped the Orange River, naming it after the Dutch royal family, and compiled detailed observations of the region's flora, fauna, geology and indigenous societies. He embarked on a second journey in 1777-78, accompanied initially by William Patterson, the botanist, collector and charming companion, who soon turned back due to illness, and Johannes Schumacher, the artist. Gordon left Cape Town, travelling to Swellendam and onward to present-day Aberdeen, from where he crossed the Snoeberg to a point just west of Colesberg. He then retraced much of his route back to Snoeberg before heading southeast to Cookhouse, making several excursions to meet Xhosa chiefs along the way. One of Gordon's objectives on this trip was to reach the Groot Rivier, which he achieved by travelling north to its confluence with the Caledon River. Schumacher accompanied him throughout, producing a remarkable visual record of their travels, a record that today sometimes makes it difficult to distinguish his sketches from Gordon's own drawings. Gordon was meticulous in recording data, noting altitudes, compass headings, hours travelled and other details, all of which would later contribute to the comprehensive map he planned. Patterson noted that one of Gordon's aims on this expedition was to meet Xhosa chiefs near present-day Somerset East. For most of his journey, Gordon followed well-established routes, occasionally accompanied by others travelling the same way. His equipment travelled in a single wagon, while he moved on horseback, exploring the veldt, observing, recording and sometimes hunting. Gordon's third journey, from September to October 1778, took him northeastward to the frontiers of the colony, in the company of Governor Joachim van Plettenberg. He also visited the Eastern Cape in 1786, which we'll return to. Gordon's journals and drawings reveal a genuine respect for the people he encountered. He documented the customs and techniques of the Khoikhoi and San. He recorded their stories, sketched their homes, and noted their ecological knowledge. Yet Gordon was a man of contradictions. As much as he revered the natural world and its people, he remained a colonial officer. He operated within and often benefited from the structures of imperial power. His expeditions were sanctioned by the VOC, and his reports were sent back to the Netherlands for strategic and scientific purposes. What sets Gordon apart, however, is how personal his exploration became. He wasn't merely collecting for glory or profit. He was seeking understanding of the land, its people, and perhaps of himself. In the 18th century, long before satellite images or detailed topographic maps, exploration was a form of authorship. To map a river, to name a mountain, was to inscribe both knowledge and power onto the land. But Robert Jacob Gordon didn't just chart South Africa, he painted it. The 456 images in his collection form one of the most extraordinary visual records of Southern Africa, filled with maps, watercolour landscapes, botanical illustrations and ethnographic sketches. They offer a window into a world few Europeans had seen, and even fewer tried to understand. Many of these works were created between 1773 and 86, during Gordon's major expeditions. He travelled thousands of miles by ox wagon and on foot, often accompanied by soldiers, servants and local guides, documenting what he saw with the precision of a scientist and the sensitivity of an artist. Today, these watercolours are preserved in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and many are digitised online. But they are more than just beautiful artefacts. They are scientific documents, cultural records, and deeply personal reflections of Gordon's vision of the world. Among the most striking parts of the Gordon Atlas are his botanical drawings. In a time when Europe knew very little about South Africa's plant life, Gordon captured it with remarkable care and precision. Drawing after drawing shows delicate renderings, flowering succulents, aloes in bloom, bulbous roots and finely veined leaves, often labelled in his own hand with both Latin names and Khoikhoi terms. He wasn't just collecting specimens, he was creating a visual archive of a living, diverse landscape. He painted species like the protea, South Africa's national flower, long before it became a symbol of the nation. He documented Aloe ferox in exquisite detail, from its serrated edges to its towering red blossoms. He also sketched medicinal plants used by local communities, carefully noting their names and their uses. The people use this root for stomach complaints, Gordon wrote in one entry, likely referring to a species of pelargonium, a plant now used in herbal medicine worldwide. These botanical illustrations weren't just beautiful, they were scientific, observational, diagnostic. They captured form, colour and function. For European naturalists like Linnaeus, Thunberg and Banks, Africa's flora was a frontier, and Gordon provided the map. But while others collected and exported plants, Gordon stayed to study them. His approach was slow and deliberate. The plants weren't trophies, they were subjects. This patient attention is clear in the watercolours themselves, the delicate ink outlining each petal, the subtle shifts in colour hinting at a late-season wilt, the roots sometimes lifted just enough to reveal their structure, yet still anchored in the soil that nourished them. Take a moment as we move through these slides. Every stem, seed and flowering vine you see was drawn with quiet reverence, not just to record the plant, but to understand its place in the world. These illustrations, now digitized and freely accessible, let us witness a kind of collaboration across centuries, between Gordon, the land and the people. But Gordon didn't stop at plants. He sketched the broader landscape, rolling hills along the Orange River, vast plains dotted with wildebeest, and cloud-covered peaks. He captured both the extraordinary and the everyday, giving his work an unrivalled vibrancy. Perhaps most striking are his depictions of people. He painted the Khoikhoi, San and other indigenous communities, not as curiosities but as fully human. He recorded their customs, techniques and stories, creating work that feels ethnographic in the modern sense. Even his maps reflect this empathy. Rather than empty outlines, they are filled with notes on climate, animal migrations, vegetation zones and indigenous settlements. Gordon didn't just map locations, he mapped relationships, seeking to understand why things were the way they were and how they all fit together. Gordon's atlas was never published during his lifetime. It lingered in archives, fragmented and half forgotten. But today, thanks to modern preservation and digitization, we can step back into his world. Flipping through the pages of the Gordon Atlas, it becomes clear this was more than simple documentation. It was devotion. A record not just of what he saw, but of what he felt. All of that said, the actual reason for Gordon's expeditions into the interior were never officially explained. He was a professional soldier, so why was he given the time and resources to undertake these journeys? Some historians suggest his real purpose, at least in his later trips, was military, gathering intelligence to defend the Cape against foreign threats. This view is supported by reports of British activity at St. Francis Bay on the eastern Cape coast in 1785, which raised Dutch concerns. As commander of the Cape garrison, Gordon's 1786 visit to the Eastern Cape was likely part of a confidential mission for the VOC, looking into the logistics of establishing military garrisons in the region. For all his achievements, the explorations, the sketches, the observations, Gordon's life didn't end in celebration, but in silence. By the early 1790s, Gordon had spent nearly 20 years in the Cape Colony. He had risen through the ranks of the VOC, eventually becoming commander of the Cape garrison. For a time, he was respected, even admired by those in power. But the world around him was changing fast. The Dutch Republic was collapsing. In 1795, the Batavian Revolution brought a new republican government aligned with revolutionary France. Britain, eager to block French influence, sent troops to seize control of the Cape. Suddenly, the colony became a pressure point in a global struggle, a strategic node in the battle between empires. Caught in the middle was Gordon. When the British fleet arrived at Simon's Bay in June 1795, Gordon faced an impossible choice. As the senior Dutch military officer, he could either resist with vastly inferior forces or negotiate. Hoping to avoid unnecessary bloodshed, he chose diplomacy. He greeted the British with civility and eventually allowed them to occupy Cape Town peacefully. Strategically, his decision may have saved lives. Politically, it was a disaster. Many of his own soldiers, loyal to the new Batavian Republic, viewed his actions as betrayal. Rumours spread quickly. He was accused of treason by his own troops, of selling out the Dutch cause, of secretly siding with the British. Almost overnight, Gordon became a pariah. He was removed from his post. Protesters gathered outside his home. Soldiers who had once followed him now cursed his name. His reports and journals, once prized by the company, were ignored. He was ordered to retire to his estate in the shadow of Table Mountain. There, isolated and shunned, Gordon descended into despair. We can only guess at his state of mind in those final weeks. Some historians suggest he suffered from a long-term illness, malaria or a degenerative condition. Others point to signs of depression, compounded by political chaos and personal disgrace. On October the 25th, 1795, Robert Jacob Gordon took his own life. He was just 52 years old. Details are scarce, but it's said he shot himself in his study, surrounded by the very drawings and journals that no longer had a place in the world he had spent decades documenting. He died in obscurity, noted one British observer later, though once regarded among the finest minds at the Cape. His Swiss-born wife, Susanna Nicolay, and their children were left behind in a colony now under British control. Gordon was buried quietly, with no public honours. To both empires, Dutch and British, he had become an inconvenient memory. For over a century, Gordon's name barely appeared in historical accounts. His papers were scattered, his maps filed away, his watercolours forgotten in museum vaults. Only a few scientists and archivists referenced his work, and often without acknowledging the man himself. Was Gordon a coward or a pragmatist? a loyal servant of empire or a reluctant participant. The truth, as always, lies somewhere in between. What we do know is this. Gordon tried to navigate the collision of Enlightenment science and colonial politics. He believed in peace, in knowledge, in human dignity. In his journals, Gordon once wrote, "The winds of the interior speak clearer than the voices of men. Here I find silence more honest than speech." Those winds never stopped, but for years no one was listening. Gordon's work sat in silence, his name obscured, his story fragmented. But in recent decades, that silence has begun to break. Historians and archivists have painstakingly pieced together Gordon's life, not just as a colonial officer, but as a scientist, an artist, and a human being. Gordon's legacy today is not one of conquest, but of observation, a life spent trying to see more clearly. "I write for those who come after me," Gordon once said. "May they see this land not as something to own, but to understand." Next time you gaze at the Orange River, take a moment. Think of the man who named it, Robert Jacob Gordon, soldier, scientist, explorer. His life ended too soon, clouded by misunderstanding and doubt. Yet his maps, his journals, his discoveries remain, allowing us today to glimpse this land as he once did.